Thank you, Simon Njami, for participating to this interview. I would like to start from the title of the Biennale de Dakar, which will run from May the 3rd till June the 2nd, 2016. Because you have quite an acquaintance with words, and I find the title particularly interesting. I would like to know, how would you translate it in English? La cité dans un jour bleu, because to me, cité is quite problematic, and would like to discuss it with you. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I think it could do the city in the blue daylight, something like that.
Like the city.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And how can you tell me more about this title? How did you come up with this title, and then subsequently the concept of the exhibition?
Well, there are 2 or 3 different things. The catalog will be presented in 3 different volumes.
Mm-hmm.
The first one will be dealing with the exhibition. The second one will be dealing with, how could I say that, the public events. Mm-hmm. And the third one will be dealing with theoretical writings. Mm-hmm. The whole thing is entitled the Daylight, whatever, but the exhibition itself is called the Reenchantments. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the whole thing are linked. The general title, I borrowed it from Senghor, one of his poetry. He wrote in the 40s, and it was a dream of a country that would be all together, a dream of a universal brotherhood, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. It was also an anti-colonial dream, because it was a kind of a projection of what would be Africa when it's rid of the colonial powers. So it's a kind of a utopia. Mm-hmm. that I wanted to reassess and to reenact, because I think that we need to reenact this kind of dreams nowadays when we see what is all over us. Mm-hmm. And hence the title of the exhibition, Reenchantment, is also linked with this kind of utopia, like trying to put some hope in this world of ours. And the third chapter of this Biennale will be entitled Bandung, which is another utopia of non-alignment. Mm-hmm. But this time, I want to transfer the political non-alignment into a cultural non-alignment, because even if we're living in a wonderful global village, we know that as far as art is concerned, things, when you say international, you mean basically London, Basel, Kassel, New York, but you don't mean Bombay, you don't mean Sao Paulo, you don't mean all those kind of things. And there's a certain group, which is the world we're living in, who are kind of dictating the rules. Mm-hmm. And at times, some other people would believe that they have to follow them. So I wanted to try and find a way to create other rules that would not necessarily be the center, whatever that means, or the global market rules.
Mm-hmm. And which are these rules?
Well, they're basically run by the market. You go in any biennale and you'll see that it's run by the market.
Right? Yeah. I mean, the new rules you would like to establish.
I don't know. I want just people to sit together and to think. I invited some people from India, from Korea, from Brazil, from Spain, just to sit and talk and to exchange ideas. Because the way they consider and they deal with contemporary art in Bombay is not the same day in New York, not the same day in Sao Paulo. So I just wanted people to get together and to try to invent new ways, but not necessarily going by the mainstream, but going by the way people are trying to do their thing on a daily basis. And these are the things we read in our newspaper when we when we open them.
Mm-hmm. So what are your expectations for this biennial, and what do you think is the role of this biennial for contemporary African art today?
Well, I don't know about contemporary African art. I deal with African art by accident, but I don't know what African art is. But I think I deal with contemporary art. And there's some contemporary artists in Africa too, and everywhere else. Now, what I would like to do or to achieve is to develop a critical gaze and to make people think from within and not from outside. And this applies to Africa, but this applies to a lot of other places. I've been seeing some young Italian who wanted to go to New York because that's where it happens. I've been seeing some young French artists wanted to go to London because that's where it happens. It's just to try to make people think for themselves and to deal with what they have and to try to make it, if not attractive, at least self-sufficient. I think that if we look at it, there's a parallel one could do with migrations. People take a lot of risk to end up in some holes. Some of them die, etc., because they think that the grass is greener elsewhere, when maybe they could forge some ways and some tools where they are in order to enchant them and to give them some hope. So again, the enchantment is just to try to deal with what you have around you and try to transform it into something else, instead of thinking that there's only one way and one definition or one solution. I mean, art is not necessarily meant for museums. Art is not necessarily meant for biennales. I mean, there's different ways of displaying art and of thinking of contemporaneity. So that's the aim, for people to think of new ways, or to, how could I put it, to decolonize their minds from they hear every day. I mean, if you open a global magazine talking about Africa or Italy or whatever, what you will find is not necessarily what you know, because the headlines won't be dealing with what are the inner forces in those countries, but only on the surface. So I want people not to deal with the headlines or the front pages, but to deal with what they know is there, instead of trying to fight some preconceptions. I don't mind people with their preconceptions. We all have preconceptions. What would be dangerous is to believe in some other people's preconceptions.
Yeah, that's right. So what are the critical tools you had to understand? Because I mean, the Biennale de Dakar, it's a biennial of African art mainly, and artists from the diaspora, right? So what are the tools the critical and practical tools you had to understand the scene and the tendencies and what is going on there, to analyze the situation and to understand eventually which kind of utopia we can apply to this situation and develop the discourse you're making?
I'll tell the secret. I'm probably one of the very few persons in this world that have been in all the African countries many times, and I've been working there. I created a magazine some years ago to deal with the contemporary facts on this continent. I'm quite often there to run workshops, etc., to talk to people, and I mean, I've been observing and taking notes. I mean, I'm not doing this Biennale out of scratch. And if I accepted the challenge, it's because I've been thinking of it for quite some years. But the tools, the critical tools I'm using, which are tools that I think people should use more, are philosophy, psychology, and history, and a bit of politics. And when you're using psychoanalysis, you know that the me as something that is meaning and that needs to be constructed. So the thing is just that you don't build a theory from outside, but from inside. Mm-hmm. It's like when you were a doctor, you don't decide of the disease of your patient. You observe him, and then you see how you can fix things. So yes, and I think that there's a heavy heritage, whether people want it or not, which is colonization. I don't care about colonization. I care about what it has been constructing in people's mind. If you look at the way the countries are run, if you look at the dictate of the World Bank or the MFI, etc., are dictating things. If you look at what happened in Europe recently with Greece, mm-hmm. and if you look at what is happening now with Great Britain, you can see, my kids were telling me at that, the way they deal with the British is not exactly the same way they're dealing with the Greeks. So I guess this is how things are. You look at who has the money and who has the power. And I want to break this kind of notion of money, army, and power. I think that you don't need to be rich or to have a strong army to be powerful. If you're able to construct something from within, if you're able to construct something that is organic. And this is what I'll be trying to do. And again, to construct something organic doesn't mean to isolate yourself from the rest of the world. This is why I invited some Indians, some Italian, some Brazilian, etc., is just to have this kind of confrontation and this discussion. I think that the very crucial time we're living, and this is why we're going through all those turmoils, is the definition of the self. I think the world is a bit lost for whatever reason, and it's not proper to Africa. Africa has lost its own way. When you look at Europe, when you look at the fact that the most powerful political party in France is National Front, the far-right party, when you see the way the far-rights in Europe are raising, when you see how the Polish or the former Eastern countries are dealing, I think that people are lost and don't know who they are anymore, and they're finding strange solutions. When you look at all the extremism we're facing nowadays, it's simply based on insecurity. And that insecurity is very psychoanalytical. If you know who you are, you don't fear the other. And you don't fear the judgment of the other. You just do what you have to do. And this is the kind of things I want to use in order to deconstruct this paradigm.
And do you think you can make it through art?
I think art is the only place where you can make it. I mean, when I hear a flamenco singer, I know I'm listening to something that is coming from south of Spain, but yet it can be heard in Japan or in South Africa with the same kind of emotion. And I think art, let's take it in the very global sense of it, not only painting, but art as a practice, is what defines us, and it's what we share in common. People tend to forget that if you look at the cave painting some couple of thousands of years ago, if you look at them, they're all alike, from the Bramberg in Namibia to Lascaux. So I guess there's a language that doesn't need explanations, that doesn't need the language. There's a language that doesn't need words to be understood. When you move by music, it might be in a language you don't master, but you'll be moved by something you cannot even analyze. So I think that the very territory of the self is that of art. When you're dealing with politics, you're forced to lie, even if they're useful whatever, lies. When you're dealing with banking, you're forced to lie. When you, even as a doctor, at times you wouldn't tell your patient how bad the situation is. But when you're dealing with art, I mean, when you're not dealing with art as a banker or as a politician or whatever, we have a lot of those. Those who move from Wall Street to the art scene and who are doing very well. Good for them. But I mean, when you're dealing with art to express something that is very personal, then you can be understood and then you can make a change.
Don't you think there is that art can be a kind of way of lying too?
I mean, there's some people, I gave you the example of this Wall Street golden boy who became an artist. Of course, but we all lying, but you have explicit lies and implicit lies. Mm-hmm. An artist doesn't master 100% of what he is presenting, no matter how honest he would try to be. There's always a percentage that he doesn't master himself. So yes, there might be some lies there, and we might be doing things thinking that we're doing them for some different reason. But at the end of the day, contrary to politics and these other things, art stands there. When I look at a painting, or when I look at I listen to music, I don't care about what the artist or the critic is telling me about. I start by listening to it, looking at it and confronting it, and then I have my own opinion, and then whatever is said about it might help me to form my opinion. But the first thing that matters to me is my confrontation with what is in front of me.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess this was kind of criteria for selecting the artist too, right? For the biennial.
Yes, I've always told to an artist that, to every artist, to the French ones, if you want to be American, I have enough Americans in America. If you're trying to be French, then and let's talk about it, because there's some words people are afraid of. They're afraid of saying I'm Senegalese. They're afraid of saying I'm French. They might be afraid of saying I'm Italian. I'm not talking about the people I know from there in Tuscany. Well, they wouldn't say I'm Italian. They would say I'm from Tuscany, and we're special. And everybody in Italy would say the same thing. But I think that it means something to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. But then people who fear to state where they're coming from are people who don't know that the place you're coming from does not tell about who you are. Mm-hmm. To say I'm Cameroonian, I'm French, doesn't mean that one would know who you are. But you're coming from a place, and then you've been going through experiences that would define you. I mean, if you look at two siblings, two twins, mm-hmm. they're different people, born at the same time, etc., but then the experience developed them. And I think that this is what makes what I call, people might use wrongly that word, identity. Mm-hmm. The identity, what makes us unique. And what I'm asking to artists, wherever they are from, is to show me their identity. And not an identity in a sense that a Spanish would be dressed as a matador, or a German would, or an Austrian would be yodeling. But the very identity, that is something very complex and very multi-layered.
Mm-hmm. Which is very personal.
Which is nothing but personal, but constructed with many things. Uh-huh. I mean, before we talked, I was reading a book that I started to read because I was expecting you. But I'm not the same than the one who was expecting you, because I started to read that book and there's some new information in my mind.
Yeah. So how can we deal with time and the way it changes us?
Well, we can deal with time according to one of my dear authors, Merleau-Ponty. Mm-hmm. who says that what defines time is a gaze. The time does not pass, we pass. And he was putting the time, it's a complex quote, but basically he said that every dimension of time must be approached for what it is. He said that tomorrow is a future past. Yesterday was an ancient future, etc., etc. And if you look at it, this great phenomenologist from the French philosophy school, one of the major one, is just saying the same thing that people say in India and Africa. There are places or languages where you don't have words for tomorrow. You have after today or before today. And I think that if we deal with the time in that way, we might be less wrong, because time is about today. And again, the same as for identity. You think that today is only today, you're wrong. Today is the result of the many days before. And tomorrow will just be another day to add. There's no creation of today. Today is a result like tomorrow. And yesterday was the result of the days before. So if we deal with time that way, we know that we have to be in the here and now, knowing that the here and now is moving all the time.
And talking about here and now in Senegal and in Africa, you were dealing with, you were saying before that you are not dealing directly with contemporary African art, but with contemporary art. But you have curated a lot of exhibitions, and as you said, you are particularly involved in the African scene, even if it's quite ridiculous to say African because it's a continent. But this biennial, it's a biennial of contemporary African art. Or at least this is the statement of the biennial,
yes,
right? Okay.
It's a statement, but if you come there, again, you'll see some Indian artists, you'll see some Spanish artists, etc., etc. It's a biennale. The reason why, because when I was a kid, some centuries ago, I was dealing with all those things, and one day, some friends, it was quite an interesting conversation, were discussing about art, and they were telling me, and I had to realize who I was. They were telling me, well, you see, we were talking about the continent, and say, oh, and nothing is coming from Africa, nothing is happening there. But they were not talking to me as the son of my parents. They're talking to me as this Sorbonne guy who is dealing with all those things. And I said, how can you say that? I mean, I'm coming from there. And this is, to make a long story short, how we started to do this Revue Noire magazine. Because I just realized that in the world where I was living, nobody knew anything about what was happening there. Or if they had the illusion to know something, it was only misconception or preconceptions. And I know that some friend of mine became a bit mad at me because all of a sudden I started to work with other people and telling them, sorry, you don't need me. You have Beaux-Arts magazine, you have flash art, you have this, and that. Those people have nothing, so I'm going to concentrate a bit on them. And then I'll stop when they will be there. But when we started the magazine, there was no African at the Venice Biennale. Castle would not imagine to put an African or an artist coming from Africa there, not to mention the other things. The situation has changed. But yes, I'm more interested in dealing with Brazilian artists and with Caribbean artists and with African artists or with Asian artists than with European artists, because I have the feeling that there's a lot of people who are dealing with them already.
Don't you think that African is a kind of label?
Of course it's a label. And at times we're using it. I mean, when we say Africa, we're not going to start a lecture to explain that the Moroccan used to enslave the people from the other side of the border, that is the Sahara Desert, and that they destroyed the Timbuktu Library. We're not going to start to say that there's a bunch of Africans who are white and blue eyes. It's like blue-eyed. There's Africa, at least some people located somewhere, even if when we use the term we mean some different things. But there was a moment where it was a usual tool. When I did this show called Africa Remix, I used the term Africa for people to know what I was dealing with, but I used remix for them to realize, well, for those who were not that stupid, that the Africa that I was going to show had nothing to do with whatever Africa they thought of, because we are all remixed. It's just in that very exhibition, there's an artist who presented a work on stereotypes. So there was the German, there was the Spanish, and I don't know who was the third. And of course, he was using the preconception that one could have on a Spanish and on a German and on exactly the same thing. We have to fight preconceptions, but there are always preconceptions. Mm-hmm. Tell me you're Italian, I start to do like this. To talk about the mafia, whatever. You tell me you're Japanese, I start to do like this, etc., etc. So we have to deal with it, but then we have to deconstruct it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you want to deconstruct it?
Well, when I was a kid and when I was teaching, when people ask me, well, where are you from? I would say Switzerland, for instance. And people thought it was a joke. It was a joke, but it was not a joke because I hold a Swiss passport. Mm-hmm. But since they were expecting me to say something else, then at least they could click and say and imagine that, well, your face or whatever that doesn't tell about who you are. Mm-hmm. And some people I was teaching in the States would tell me, you're the French. I say, I'm sorry, I'm not French. I say, well, but I'm from the Sorbonne, etc., etc. So there's so many layers that the only thing is to remind people that there's so many layers, and to be a kind of a mirror of their preconceptions, and to tell them that, oh, they're free to have preconception. I'm free to have preconception as well. Preconceptions are not located in one part of the world. They're everywhere, and we all have preconceptions. But people tend to think that the preconceptions are only going, and this is part of this ethnocentrism, that preconceptions are spreading from Europe out, not realizing that now preconception on Europe and on America, everywhere else. Mm-hmm. So by realizing this quote, by making people realize this quote by Rimbaud, they might start to think differently if every time they think, Rimbaud said, I is another. So if one think about it, then when they say the African or this and that, they might think, well, I might be as well the one I'm calling the other. Mm-hmm. And then the way of analyzing a thing would radically change, because you don't analyze yourself like you analyze the other.